Liverpool suddenly thought, oh no, we're going to blow a 2-goal lead and drop points. You can have a 7-point lead, but you know that Arsenal have won the day before, and you then blow it. I think they're still a bit frazzled by that Merseyside derby in midweek.
Matthias Cunha, this guy can play in any top 6 team. So which top 6 team will he be playing in next year?
I think he'll have his pick. I think we can say with some certainty it won't be Wolverhampton Wanderers.
I'll be really interested to see what the strength of the market is for him. It might work, but I think there's a good chance it won't.
They needed a cutting edge, they need to find a way through, and they did it with the heartbreaker, Mikel Merino.
A victory not just for Arsenal, but for the neutral, because had they have dropped points and we expected Liverpool to go and beat Wolves, albeit they made heavy weather of it, I think the title race would have been over. At the moment, Arsenal clinging on in there, but they've got more difficult opponents to come in the next few weeks. They are too far back. Manchester City, 16 points behind Liverpool, and it's going to be competitive for those final 4th and 5th Champions League places.
It's the Premier League All Access podcast with me, Sam Matterface, talkSPORT chief football correspondent Alex Crook, and European football expert Kev Hatchard, who is here. Well, what a weekend we have had. Mikel Merino is the new super number 9 for Arsenal. Liverpool just about scraped past Wolves. Kev was behind his sofa, biting his nails, couldn't believe it. Matthias Cunha was going to down everything for him. And Manchester United and Tottenham Hotspur played out an absolute cracker at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. If you like Sunday morning football, that is. Highlight of the weekend, Crook?
Highlight of the weekend. Wow, that's an interesting one. Do you know what? Karen Matoma's goal on Friday night, or the first touch anyway. A thing of beauty.
Have you recovered from Tottenham Hotspur against Manchester United yet?
Do you know what? I'm at the stage with United where I can't even be bothered to get angry anymore. You know, it's not a surprise, is it? As soon as I heard on Saturday afternoon that Amad Diallo was out for the rest of the season, no Kobbie Mainoo, I think it was inevitable. I think it probably says more about Spurs, actually, that United had enough chances in that second half to still probably go on and win the game, and obviously didn't take them. I mean, it was 2 terrible teams, wasn't it? It was so bad at times that's what made it entertaining. But yes, sad state of affairs at the moment at Old Trafford.
And Kev, you were in Germany doing Bayern and Bayer Leverkusen, but you're also keeping an eye on what happened with Liverpool and Wolves yesterday, I know. There's a few difficult games coming up for Liverpool. Have we got a title race, or are Liverpool just on the march to a procession?
We absolutely do have a title race, because you look at the games they've got coming up. Villa away, that's tough. Manchester City away. They've got Arsenal still to play at Anfield. So yeah, absolutely. My highlight of the weekend was the full-time whistle at Anfield, because it felt like it was never going to come, quite frankly. So I was quite happy to see that happen. Yeah, that was and that just shows you the dynamics of a title race. It gets very, very nervy.
Yeah, my highlight was the fact that Brighton versus Chelsea took place on Friday night. So it doesn't really count as a weekend game. So we probably don't have to reflect on it too much. In fact, just by mentioning Matoma's touch, we've probably done all that we need to do on that particular game, which was, if you're a Chelsea fan watching that is pretty frustrating to have sat there and plundered Brighton as much as they have for all of their best players, and then to go back there and realise that they're still very much better than you is quite a sad state of affairs for those in charge at Chelsea. Anyway, quickly moving on, should we dive straight in to the action from the weekend and start at the Etihad Stadium? Well, Kev says we've got a title race, but I don't think that you were talking necessarily about Manchester City. They're just too far back, aren't they? Despite the fact that they really look to have clicked on Saturday.
Yeah, I still think it's difficult to make too big a judgment, because Newcastle were way off the pace, and we touched on this in the preview podcast. It does concern me, if I'm a Newcastle fan, do they check out a little bit now before the League Cup final? As happened 2 years ago. I think we decided that mentally they were probably in a better place, but it didn't look like it on Saturday. Omar Marmoush, obviously terrific with his hat-trick, and I'm sure Kevy's going to wax lyrical about him, but I think this was as much about Newcastle dropping their very high standards as it was about Manchester City getting back to somewhere where we know they can be.
You don't really think that they've got their eye on the Carabao Cup final this far out. It's a month away.
Well, how else do you explain the performance? You know, when you look at the standards they've set this season, I think you and I both thought there could be a minor upset there. And actually, we both
Yeah.
said that Newcastle might be good value for the win, but that was very quickly taken away from them.
Is some of it to do with the fact that Joe Linton's not in midfield, Kev? Because that midfield area looked completely off the pace at the weekend, and he is a real physical presence. Anyone's going to miss him if he's not available. And their pressing, which is so important to what they do, was just off.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you've got a team that relies on that pressing, if it is slightly off, the whole thing falls apart really quickly. And I think the first goal really killed them, the nature of it. It was a bad goal to give away, brilliant finish, but a bad goal to give away. And that midfield three, when it's been Tonali, Bruno Guimaraes and Joe Linton, has been the bedrock of what they've done. One of the best midfields in the Premier League, probably actually one of the best in Europe as a three for what they do in terms of the overall kind of skill sets that they have mixed together. So yeah, and I think as well, I mean, we saw it with Bournemouth in the home game, didn't we? When they played Bournemouth, they were totally off it. I think that physicality is so important to them. If they're not quite at the level, you are going to get exposed. But I just think, just going back to what you said about Manchester City, are they too far back? The problem with them is, it wasn't necessarily true in this game, but in general, they are so vulnerable without the ball. Now, I think Nico Gonzalez coming in is going to change that. But if you look at the statistics, they give up more fast breaks than any team in the league, and that's including Southampton. So yikes on that. And, if you can't quite get there without the ball, there's no way you can be consistent enough to get back to where they need to be.
Nico Gonzalez did make a huge difference in midfield in this game, Crook. And afterwards, Pep called him our mini Rodri. Are we on board with that comparison?
Well, I think he makes a massive difference. Of all the January signings they made, I think that was the most important right at the end of the window, because you talk about Newcastle's midfield and how much they miss Joe Linton. You state the obvious to say that City have fallen off a cliff, really, since Rodri was injured. And it's a brilliant start, isn't it? You never know how players signed from overseas leagues are going to settle in the Premier League, but he looks right at home already. And I think he's going to have a really important role in the second half of the season, just in terms of cementing a top four finish. Because to go back to your question, they are too far back. Manchester City, 16 points behind Liverpool, and he's going to be competitive for those final fourth and fifth Champions League places.
Okay, talk to me about the Egyptian prince, successor to Mohamed Salah. Omar Marmoush recently joined in January. He's got a hat-trick inside 14 minutes at the weekend. He was clinical with Eintracht Frankfurt prior to that. It's taken him a little bit of time to settle, Kev, but on Saturday we saw his true quality. I think actually, having watched him, all of us felt as if it was just a matter of time, and we saw that on Saturday.
Yeah, and I think from the get-go, even the games where he hasn't been scoring, he's been trying to affect the game. He's been having shots from range. He's been getting into good positions. And Saturday just showed what he's all about, because he's got pace in behind. He's really smart with his movement. His technique is excellent. He's a great finisher, really, really good finisher. You look at what he's been doing in the Bundesliga this season. He got 20 goals in all competitions for Frankfurt in pretty much half a season. And he scores all types of goals. And I thought the way he took the first one was outstanding. And he's just so calm in front of goal. It's what really has helped him make this leap this season. I think that it's interesting you say about Salah, because that's a big thing in Egypt. They are kind of readying him as the successor. And Salah's come out himself and said, please don't do this. Please don't put all of that pressure on him at this stage, because he has still got room to grow. He is still developing, but it does show you how well he's doing that comparison's being made. I think he's a super player and a great replacement for Julian Alvarez, even though it is half a season too late.
I've been a little bit critical of Ederson and the way that he has conceded goals over the course of the season. Do you have to sometimes forgive those faux pas, though, when he has the ability to pull out assists like that? Or actually, do you have to say, look, it's great that you can do that, but 6 over the course of your career isn't worth making the mistakes that sometimes you have done previously? Where do you stand on it, Crook?
Well, call me old-fashioned. I like my goalkeeper to keep the ball out the back of the net, first and foremost. Obviously, the modern phenomenon is that they play out and they are assist providers. But yeah, I don't think one assist in a 4-0 win necessarily legislates for the mistakes that have cost City points this season. I think, again, we're going to look at the summer. We expect City to go big again. I think they've got a decision to make. Do they bring in a new number one, or do they put their faith in Stefan Ortega?
Eddie Howe says that they will go back to basics next week. the key thing is to ensure that they bolster that midfield again and get control in there and get their pressing game right. They've had a couple of examples of this already this season, but they've been in such brilliant form. You would expect him after a week on the training ground next week to put it right again, Kev.
Yeah, I think so. I think, as we say, it's that they've hit quite a high level overall, I think. But you're against top quality opposition as well. And I'd say that about the Bournemouth game as well. The way they're playing. The Premier League, I know people have looked at what's happened with Tottenham and with Chelsea maybe at the moment and Manchester United. I can't remember a less forgiving Premier League in some ways, in terms of you're running into really well-coached teams pretty much every week. And I think it has become a coaches' league. I mean, if you look at, Fulham under Marco Silva, what Antonio Raiola's doing at Bournemouth, yes, the teams at the bottom have really been off it and struggled. But I think even Vitor Pereira, and we'll talk about that in a bit, I'm sure, even what he's done at Wolves, it has made a positive impact. So, it is tricky a lot of the time, because you're not only trying to keep the fitness with a busy schedule, but you're also trying to deal with these match plans that you're coming up against every week.
Yeah, and the other thing about that is that you mentioned about the coaches. I mean, even like McKenna down at Ipswich has also made an impact in his team. The next game that Newcastle play will be Nottingham Forest at home, and Nottingham Forest, who had a bump in the road at the weekend because they came up against a very good side in Fulham, will then want to prove a point next weekend. So that in itself becomes a difficult game. But again, it's worth pointing out Newcastle have won 12 of the last 15 games. That's a pretty impressive record. So yes, they got thumped at Manchester City, but up until that point, they've been playing particularly well. Let's move on to the game at lunchtime that I was at, Leicester 0, Arsenal 2. It took a long time for this game to sort of burst into life. Let's be clear, the first half an hour to 40 minutes of this match was just a drudge. It was awful. There was not much in it, and Leicester were absolutely delighted about that. They needed a cutting edge. They needed to find a way through, and they did it with the heartbreaker, Mikel Merino. Didn't buy his missus a Valentine's present, did a bit of a crook, just sort of stumbled into something and said, yeah, you can have that. Here's a couple of goals. Yeah, that's your Valentine's present. But it seemed to have worked for Arsenal.
It did. And I feel like, as Scott Minto was saying to you on the Sunday session, this was a victory not just for Arsenal, but for the neutral, because had they have dropped points and we expected Liverpool to go and beat Wolves, albeit they made heavy weather of it, I think the title race would have been over. At the moment, Arsenal clinging on in there, but they've got more difficult opponents to come in the next few weeks. And my father-in-law, big Arsenal fan, hit the nail on the head. He said you can't win games without a proper number 9 at the top end of the pitch. And yes, Marino has done his job, but against those better opponents, I think it's going to be tough for Arsenal. I really do. Not even in terms of someone to put the ball in the back of the net, but just somebody to play off, somebody to spearhead their attack, and they lack that.
They're not helped by the fact that Raheem Sterling is suffering a crisis of confidence, Kev. If you look at the contrast between the way that Ethan Nwaneri performed at the weekend and the way that Sterling performed, I mean, it was night and day, wasn't it? I mean, you've got this young kid who's 17 years and 332 days old now, and the boy Sterling, who is experienced in England international, won all that there can be to win pretty much with Manchester City and Chelsea and Liverpool, is now sort of trying to find a way back to the top level. But he just looks devoid of confidence. The one incident that I always go back to is that when the ball comes back to him on the edge of the penalty area, at any other time you would expect him just to ping it straight back towards the goal. Instead, he hesitates, waits, looks around, and then shifts it onto Nwaneri. And you just think, a confident Sterling would never, ever do that. How do you change that?
Yeah, it breaks your heart a little bit, because I've always been a huge fan of his. I think he's a terrific player. I think, he's done so well for England as well down the years, as you mentioned. The quality is there, but, it's really hard to maintain that. Not all players can do that, and not all progress is linear. You're going to get all kinds of fluctuations. I think the Chelsea move was a disaster for him. He got caught up in the churn there, and I think you're going to see a few players caught up in that in the long term that maybe could have had more progress. And I think you're absolutely right. I think it's the confidence, the quality's there, the technique's there, the football brain is still there, but you're hearing this more and more from players. Matthias de Ligt talked about it with Manchester United this week. Once the confidence goes, it's so difficult to bring it back. So Mikel Arteta, who I believe is a great manager, has got to try and bring that back somehow, bring back the joy of playing and bring back that confidence. Just on Waneri, talking of confidence, man alive, 17. But, I mean, and
I know.
Miles Lewis-Skelly as well, he's another one. He's come into the team and it looks like he's played there for 10 years. And that's always the mark of it. When you see this in Germany all the time when they're bringing in, 18, 19, 20-year-olds. I mean, Wirtz and Musiala, from the moment they came into their respective teams, they looked like they were 35. It's crazy, the kind of football brain that those guys have. And actually, before the 2 goals, Lewis-Skelly with a really good defensive touch to take the ball away when it looked as though Leicester were going to take the lead.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because that's a key moment in the game, isn't it? Because it changes at that point. Lewis-Skelly gets back, nicks it away from Bobby De Cordova-Reid. He just gets back into position just in time and he sort of stumbles into the ball but diverts it through the legs of De Cordova-Reid, who's waiting just to tap it in at the far post. That's a massive moment because if that goes in, all of a sudden, the desperation stakes increase exponentially for Arsenal. They've got to get 2 goals to win the game. They've got to get 1 just to level things up, and then that place would have been a different atmosphere. It would have been all sorts of things against Arsenal going into the final few minutes of the game. So it's an incredibly important intervention, and he has settled into the team really well, I think. And he isn't an out-and-out left back. He's a midfield player that's been converted to a left back, but he's comfortable playing there, and he likes playing there as well, which is quite interesting. And I said this yesterday on the Sunday session, that one of the great things about it for Arsenal is to have Lewis-Skelly and Waneri coming through at the same time, because that takes a bit of pressure off Mikel Arteta in terms of man management, because you've got best mates emerging through, experiencing the emotions of being part of the first team for the first time, all those sort of flutters of the heart when you're making your debut or you're going into Europe for the first time, and they're sort of riffing off each other and helping each other through it. That's a massive boon. Look at me and Crook. See, we couldn't get through a day without having 7 phone calls together. And when he's really confident, he's, Mr. Bolshy, non-stop flip-flop. And when he sort of, feels a little bit down and thinks people are getting on his back, he falters a little bit and, a little stumble here and there. And
you're saying that we are the talkSPORT equivalent of the Highland Academy, are you? I get your point, though. I think it's brilliant for Arsenal. As football fans, we all want to see our own, flourish in the first team. And obviously it's more by necessity than design. But you're right, the confidence that those 2 young guys have, and probably as a result of making the journey together, is a real positive. I would go as far as to say I'd be surprised if Lewis-Skelly can maintain this form for another couple of weeks. If he's not in the England squad come March, I think there's every chance that Thomas Tuchel gives him a call-up.
I have to give credit to Arteta, actually, because in the summer, they were talking about, was the squad big enough? Did he have enough options? And he did say, look, I have to create a pathway for the young players, because he said, I've been there as a young player, and you don't think you're going to get in and you lose heart because there's just no way of you progressing. So he said, I need to have that. I need to show the young players at this club in the academy that you can get in. So he's taken a bit of flack for that because they've looked really thin at times. But I think this was part of the plan to give some of these guys the opportunity. And that's a really difficult balance to strike, because there's always going to be external pressure to sign proven talents, to sign players. Whereas he thought all along, look, I need to actually create some space for some of these kids.
Yeah, but it's still light, isn't it? And I think getting that balance right, as you said, is difficult. And they've sort of probably gone a little bit too on the light side. I think he's admitted that in the last couple of weeks. He said, actually, do you know what? We haven't got enough bodies, especially now that they've got so many injuries. And they really are depleted at the top end of the pitch. And they are going to be for a little while. And at some point, we're going to have to do some sort of investigation as to why we've got so many injuries that are happening in the league. Because it's not something that's specific to one club anymore. Okay, yeah, Tottenham have got a lot more injuries, or haven't had a lot more injuries than everybody else. But, Chelsea are catching up. Arsenal are catching up. Manchester United now without probably their 2 best younger talents until the end of the season. It's happening too much, isn't it? I mean, there's got to be something to do with this stop-start nature.
Issue.
It's a stop-start nature of the game. The longer the games are being played for, the amount of sprints. Actually, it was really interesting. Yesterday, there was sort of a discussion with someone about the sheer number of sprints that are being made in matches, and that Tottenham players are making 4,200 sprints per game or something like that, which is almost twice the amount of what people were making 5-6 years ago. Well, that's got to have an impact. I mean, just science. I'm not a scientist, but that's pretty obvious that that's going to be taking a toll on the body.
Well, I covered RB Leipzig on Friday night. Now, the way they play is very high press, lots of sprints, lots of short, sharp movements. They are on course to have 1,000 days worth of player absences in one season. So obviously, that's more than 365 days, but there's a lot of players at once, all injured. Now, just imagine that. That's 3 years worth of injuries in one campaign. Now, part of that is the way they play. But I know for a fact Leipzig spend an enormous amount of money on their medical staff, on their player welfare, all of that stuff. But they're playing 8 Champions League games, every few days they're playing, and it's causing a massive issue. And I think we need to look at the scheduling. We need to change our view of squad rotation, because we need to talk about what is a weakened team. Because actually, sometimes you need to just protect players. I find it extraordinary the amount of minutes Salah's played for Liverpool. Absolutely amazing that he's been able to do that, because, I know he's tweaked his game and things like that, but I just think it's not sustainable anymore, the way that we're doing it.
And the other thing is that we might see a change in style of football, Crook, as well. Like we tried to discuss last week on the podcast, where we were talking about the death of positionalism and the return of man marking and long ball, which has started to creep back in, and we've seen that and the variation of it. Even with Manchester City in their first goal at the weekend, but Nottingham Forest, who lost at Fulham at the weekend by 2-1, certainly exponents of the art of playing longer passes and happy to counter-attack after soaking up pressure. It didn't work for them this weekend because Fulham are an incredibly good, well-coached team.
Yeah, they are. I mean, for me, one of the most impressive performances that I've seen over the course of the season was when Fulham went to Chelsea and came from behind and won. And yes, it was a stoppage time winner from Rodrigo Muniz, but they were good value for the victory that day, and they were good value, I think, for this win at the weekend. 18 goals now this season for Chris Wood. I think we need to give him an honourable mention. But how good was Adama Traore? I mean, that was him at his finest, wasn't it? Taking on defenders, using his pace, getting balls into the penalty area, getting shots away, and he was very much the catalyst for Fulham. We've lauded Nottingham Forest. They're having a little bit of a sticky patch after that 7-0 win over Brighton. They've got a difficult run of games coming up as well. But Fulham, 8th in the table, well above Tottenham, well above Manchester United, ahead of Brighton, ahead of Aston Villa. I think Marco Silva also has to be in with a shout for manager of the season, because they're just quietly going about their business, but they're a really difficult side to play against. I think they're great to watch as well.
Yeah, I've been talking about them all season. I saw them at home to Brentford really early in the campaign, and I thought they were absolutely terrific that day. And they were losing until the 93rd minute, and then they ended up winning the game 2-1. And I remember saying at the time, I think this team are one of the best in that mid-table of the division, because of the way that he has got them coached, and I think he deserves a lot of credit. And they certainly benefit from convincing him to put down roots in West London. The first goal was uncharacteristic from Nottingham Forest because the marking was so bad, Kevin. How on earth did Emil Smith-Rowe get in and head that ball in when you've got Milenkovic, Morato and Murillo as the 3 centre-halves? That's something that Nuno Espirito Santo will be a little bit disappointed with, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right, but I think they were taken by surprise by that shift from Traore into his left foot, and the quality of the cross is outstanding. It's a really good ball in, lots of pace on it, and Smith-Rowe, his movement is so clever. So yeah, they should have taken care of it, but actually, I look at the attacking play, and I thought that was stellar. And you're absolutely right. I mean, he's an elite coach, Marco Silva. He just is. I mean, you look at the way that he gets the absolute most out of the players he has. I think the recruitment's been good. Haven't always been able to say that about Fulham in the last few years, but I think it has been. I think Emil Smith-Rowe coming in has done he needed to be the main man somewhere. He needed to get that game time, get that rhythm. And I think we've seen the real benefit of that and the quality that he has. So, yeah, we've talked about confidence before. They're full of confidence and belief. You talk about that Brentford game. that was just pure belief that they were able to turn that round. They've got guys like Harry Wilson who can really affect games, whether from the start or when he comes on. And everybody knows their job. Everybody knows their job. And when Calvin Bassey scored that goal, which I think is what the 17th sign of the apocalypse, Calvin Bassey scoring a goal in the Premier League. When he scored, they all looked so joyful, so happy for him. And I always think that's a really good sign.
Yeah, I couldn't work out whether they were so joyful for Calvin Bassey or still disbelieving at the amount of space he had at the far post. Because, again, he seemed to be in an ocean of his own inside the Nottingham Forest penalty area, which was, again, a little bit strange in comparison to what we're used to seeing with them. But he's done a brilliant job, Marco Silva, and he deserves a lot of credit. They'll probably finish higher than Chelsea, won't they, Crook? What do you reckon?
They may well. And I was just about to say, Manchester United away from home in the FA Cup, they've got a bit of unfinished business in that fixture. As a United fan, I'm a little bit fearful. Yeah, I'm worried about that.
They won't win that though, Fulham. They won't win that. I'll tell you why. They never beat Manchester United, even when they are the better team on the pitch. They never beat Man United. It never happens. I've seen so many of those games. You remember down at the Cottage, I think it was over a year ago now, probably 18 months ago, Bruno Fernandes scored in the last minute. Fulham absolutely dominated that game. Iwobi put them in front or whatever. They came back, or no, Iwobi should have put them in front, didn't. And then they went up the other end, the last minute, a scuffer into the corner, and Fernandes wins the game. And even this year, down at Craven Cottage, a largely poor performance by Manchester United. And then Martinez hits that scuffer and it takes a deflection and goes in and whatever. They were the better team in the FA Cup quarter-final the other year against them at Old Trafford, and then decided to have some sort of volcanic implosion.
Oh, yes.
And then ended up going from 1-0 down to 3-1, 1-0 up to 3-1 down in the matter of seconds. It was absolutely crazy. So, no, they probably will get through Manchester United because they're cakey like that when it comes to Fulham. Let's move on to Sunday now, starting with the league leaders. Well, when this game started at the weekend, I think we all thought this was business as usual. They scored quite early on. It was a bit of a fortunate goal in some ways because Salah's first initial ball into the box takes a deflection, pops up, and then it just sort of falls kindly and it's bundled in by Diaz, and goalkeeper comes out, doesn't quite get there, whatever, and it squirms in. And you just think, oh, this is going to be one of those days for Liverpool. But as the afternoon progressed, it became more and more tricky for them, Kevin.
Yeah, it did. And that's what fear can do. It's what a bit of panic can do. I think they're still a bit frazzled by that Merseyside derby in midweek, physically and mentally. And Wolves improved. And again, that kind of speaks to what we were saying about competitive teams in the Premier League. Because, yes, Wolves were, a step slow in that first half. I think Vitor Pereira talked about a lack of kind of bravery in that first half. That wasn't the team he wants to see. But they stopped Liverpool having a single shot in the second half. Now, there's two tracks to that, really. One of them is the Wolves were excellent, pressed much better, caused Liverpool a problem going the other way. And the other track to that is that Liverpool suddenly thought, oh no, we're going to blow a 2-goal lead and drop points. And that is the incredible dynamic of a title race. You can have a 7-point lead, but you know that Arsenal have won the day before, and you then blow it because you've got Villa away, you've got Manchester City away. So you have to respect what Liverpool did in the closing stages. They were taking it to the corner. They were trying to dig in. But Matheus Cunha, again, this shows the depth of the Premier League. What league in Europe would have a team in the bottom four fighting relegation with a player like that at the heart of them? And the goal he scores, just that shimmy away from the defender, smashes it into the far corner. Sensational goal. So, and also, they were close, really, to more goals in that second half. Munetsi had that run through. Alisson made a great save. There was a really good cross to the far post. And again, Jarell Quansah has to swoop in and clear the ball. So, yeah, sometimes you have to dig in and get those wins. Liverpool weren't great, but they'll take it.
Well, interestingly, if you go to all the statistics sites, they tell you that Matheus Cunha was the player of the match. And the reason for that is because he had 6 shots on the Liverpool goal during the game, including the goal that he'd scored. He has scored an inordinate number of goals for Wolverhampton Wanderers, 27 since the start of last season, which is 12 more than anybody else in their team, Crook. And Arne Slot said it before the game, this guy can play in any top 6 team. So which top 6 team will he be playing in next year?
I think he'll have his pick. I think we can say with some certainty it won't be Wolverhampton Wanderers. with no disrespect to them. Obviously, he signed a new contract. The release clause is only about £64 million, which is not expensive for a top six club in this day and age. I know Arsenal are tracking him, but they don't see him necessarily as an out-and-out number 9, which is what they're looking for. Manchester United, if they had the money, I'm sure would love to take him to Old Trafford. Maybe Liverpool themselves, if they are going to have to replace Mo Salah. It's difficult to do that with one player, so they might need to sign a number of different types of player, and he would certainly fit in there as well. So it's a lovely problem for him to have, and that's why he's playing with such confidence and such freedom, I think, because he knows that he's going to get a big move in the summer, and if he can help Wolves stay in the Premier League between now and then, and I think they will stay up, then everybody's a winner.
I think the thing I'm fascinated to see about him, I watched him a lot in Germany when he was with Hertha. And
remember when he was with Hertha?
Yes, long time ago.
We were getting so frustrated with him when he was at Hertha.
Yes.
Because he did so much great stuff, but never had any end products. And he would go missing in games and all sorts.
Exactly that. Now, part of that was it was a team in flux that were constantly fighting relegation.
What are you saying?
So he had poor players around him. Well, that was just the case at the time. At least they were in the Bundesliga then. But look, he has taken a step, there's no doubt, with Wolves. My fear still with him is, does he need to be a big fish in a small pond? And I know it sounds like we're digging out Wolves. We're not. That's just the way it is. He is the main man. He's the best player there by quite a distance. If he was to go to a top six club and becomes one of many, what does that do to the mentality? Now, it may well be he improves with better players around him, but it may well be that he doesn't really like it. He was at Atletico Madrid. It didn't really work out for him. So it may well be that with, all those guys on his level and he can't quite affect things in the way that he was, he might not like that. So that, I think, is the question he's going to have to answer if he makes that move.
Also, Kev, when you go to a big club, you have other things put on your shoulders. There's a lot more rigidity into what you can do. You aren't the star, as you've already mentioned, so you're asked to play within a system. Whereas at Wolves, because he is the big fish in that pond, he is able to do what he wants, really, isn't he? I mean, he's given a little bit of freedom that he wouldn't be afforded elsewhere. And I'm not sure that he's the kind of player that you can shackle.
Well, Gary O'Neill talked about that loads, didn't he? He talked about his work without the ball. He said, I've worked with him really closely, trying to improve his work without the ball. And that the fact that Cunha actually listened sometimes, I think, does tell you that Cunha respected Gary O'Neill as a coach. I think sometimes he can be that naughty school kid for a coach, that he won't necessarily trap back. He was
a handful, Kev. I can tell you this. He was definitely a handful for Gary. I mean, he had to work really hard to get him on side, to keep him on side, and to sort of shape him the way he wanted to. It wasn't easy.
Right? But it's a symbiotic relationship then, right? Because Gary knows if he can get the best out of Cunha, it really helps him. Obviously, in the end, he went, but he had a good run there. Now, a coach with a higher standing, who's used to higher standards maybe at a top six club, might just go, well, I'm not doing that. He either goes along with what I want or he goes. I'm not going to do that. So I'll be really interested to see what the strength of the market is for him and whether, clubs have specific plans for him, because it might work, but I think there's a good chance it won't.
Interesting. Okay. Talking of things that aren't working, Tottenham 1, Manchester United 0. This was Sunday's game. Crook, we were messaging all the way through this absolute blinder of a football match, and it was brilliant because it was so chaotic. It was, if you're a neutral, and I was so lucky, I was sitting on the halfway line, I was watching these two teams fall over, give the ball away, counter-attack, miss unbelievable chances. There were rare moments of quality, maybe one or two in the whole game. There was a brilliant goal from James Maddison, but terrible defending from Manchester United. There was a couple of good saves. Vicario back in goal, made a couple of good saves. There was the air of protest because the Tottenham fans are completely beside themselves about Daniel Levy. And by the way, it was a very well-organised protest. There were a lot of people outside, and there was stuff inside the ground as well at the weekend. And, Tottenham fans have sort of been accused of not protesting very well. This was a very well-organised protest, I think. And maybe the Tottenham and Manchester United players were protesting as well, deciding not to play much football during that 90 minutes, Crook.
Yeah, I mean, quality-wise, it was low, but that gave its own entertainment value. I think for me, there was a moment towards the end of the game that summed it up. Joshua Zirkzee had an opportunity to get a shot away, went for a volley, and kicked thin air. And I thought, this is just horrendous. And actually, Xerxes was probably one of United's
He
better
was
players.
good.
So
He was
I don't want
okay,
to
I
pick on him.
thought.
Yeah, but that just sums up where the two clubs are at this moment in time. And yeah, as I said at the top of the pod, I'm trying not to get angry about United anymore. But it's a shadow of the club that we've known over the last 3 decades, really. The club seems to have had its soul ripped out of it because of what's going on off the pitch. The quality on the field is not good enough. And fair play to Tottenham. They got a couple of players back and they did look a little bit better. And obviously Maddison enjoyed his 2-yard tap in. But yeah, I think it's really worrying for Ruben Amorim. And with those absentees, you look at the bench. Obviously, he didn't have any faith in the youngsters because it took him until stoppage time to make a change, by which point a lot of the United players are running on empty. And anybody who thinks Casemiro can still have any kind of career at the top level, just watch that 90 minutes. His legs have gone completely. But because of the injuries to Mainu and Agate, he's probably going to have to play some football between now and the end of the season, even though the Brazilian transfer window is still open. And therein lies the problem. And all the time that they're talking about PSR, and there was a story in The Guardian from Jamie Jackson last week saying that Sir Jim Ratcliffe feared if he didn't make these cutbacks, United would go bankrupt. You wonder what the solution is. Where are they going to get the money from to do the type of surgery that this squad is in need of come the end of the season?
Well, we've talked about this lots. I said to you on a number of occasions that what will happen in the summer is they will pick up a couple of free transfers that fit into the system that he wants to play. They'll buy 1 or 2 pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that he wants to solve. It won't be something. This is not going to be a short-term project. This is a long-term project, and he will promote a lot of youngsters from the youth team into the first team squad. However, I don't think he was expecting to do that in February and having to do it at such late notice as they had to do this weekend. And I think it would have been unfair, especially in that game, live on Sky on a Sunday afternoon with the whole world watching, to chuck players in when they were 1-0 down chasing a game. You know, there was a lot of 17-year-old kids on that bench. There was 3 17-year-olds, 3 19-year-olds, obviously Victor Lindelof as well. But I thought it's probably a step too early for those players. But there'll be some of those players that over the course of the next 6 months that get more experience and are more involved in the first team that next year will be a part of it. I think Harry Amass will be a part of the first team squad next year. I think Toby Collier, will see more of him next year as well. He was injured this weekend. I think you'll see, is it Obi Martin, who came on late on in the game, you know, very tall forward who's scored a lot of goals in the youth teams. Whether or not he can replicate that in first team football will remain to be seen, but he's got the stature of a first team player, and I think that's the first step, isn't it, when you're identifying those youth team players that can come in and make a contribution to the first team. But that you say that the moment that summed it up was the Xerxes non-volley. For me, it was the moment a little bit later on than that, where a Tottenham player fell over in the middle of the attacking half, and then a Manchester United player went over to nick the ball and fell over again, and it was just it was just complete mess. But it was good. It was good entertainment. Let's have a quick look forward to what's going to happen this week, because there are teams in European action. Manchester City play Real Madrid. Real Madrid had a bit of a difficult time at the weekend, Kevin. They had Jude Bellingham sent off in a frustrating draw with Osasuna. Now, we're recording this before Monday night, and we don't know if Real Madrid are still going to be top of the table or not. Unlikely by the time we get to Wednesday evening and they play Manchester City. But they have a slender goal advantage. After what we've seen at the weekend with Manchester City, are we thinking that there might be a chance for them?
There's a chance because they have that attacking firepower, and Real Madrid do have defensive issues. I actually thought as a team at the Etihad, Real defended fairly well when you bear in mind they had a makeshift back four. That's been a real issue for them. All of their defensive issues, all of their injury issues have been concentrated in that defensive area. So they've, lost Dani Carvajal, lost Lucas Vazquez, so that's the right back issue. Brought into sharp focus. Antonio Rudiger's been in and out. David Alaba's only just come back after pretty much a year out, so he's not fully fit. So they've had big issues there. But the problem City have is that even with Nico Gonzalez in there, who I like very much and I think will do really well, they are still vulnerable on the counter. And I think when you've got Vinicius and Mbappe, I mean, Mbappe's having an amazing season. This narrative that it took him a while to get going. I mean, he was scoring from the moment he arrived. I mean, he scored in something like 21 out of 37 games he scored. So, his 7 out of 10 is better than most players' 10 out of 10. And I think that's what we've seen. So, and he's starting to click with Bellingham. We saw that right at the end. With City, we've seen it with Vinicius. He's getting a good idea of where Mbappe is going to be. So I think City will score. I think it might be quite lively for quite a while, but I just don't see City defensively being able to keep Real Madrid at bay, and that's what they're going to need to do.
He had a terrible start, didn't he? He scored in his debut in the Super Cup against Atalanta.
Yeah, rubbish. Get rid of him. Terrible. Boo. Yeah, I mean, he scored in our Super Cup. He scored in the Club World Cup final, for what that's worth. He scored in that. And he scored in there, even though they got gubbed by Barcelona, he scored in the Spanish Super Cup final as well. And he's been scoring big goals. Yeah, he's still Kylian Mbappe. Don't worry about that.
Well, he's also the second top scorer in La Liga with 17 goals. He's got 25 overall. Lewandowski's got 19 in La Liga. So those two will be going for the Pichichi this year.
Yeah.
They'll be up against one another. That's Manchester City on Wednesday night. Also Wednesday night, Liverpool against Aston Villa. Come to that in just a second. We can't let Kev do everything, and he loves Liverpool and he loves Bayern Munich as well, who are in action against Celtic. But Alex Crook was the man at Celtic Park watching that first leg. So, Crook, even though Bayern had a difficult weekend-ish over Saturday and Sunday, what are they going to produce, do you think, on Tuesday night?
Well, I think that Celtic goal changes the dynamic slightly, but you would still expect Bayern with home advantage to be able to outscore Brendan Rodgers' side. And actually, I'm going to doff my hat to Kev on this because I spoke to him before the game and said, what are you expecting? And he said Celtic will score, but I think Bayern will probably have enough. I think it'll be 2-1 to Bayern. So he called the first leg spot on, so probably he's in a better position to give us a prediction. But they did give chances away, Bayern. Again, as Kev said they would at Celtic Park. I think Celtic should have had a penalty. Pretty clear for me that the stamp on Engels' foot should have resulted in a penalty. The referee came to the screen, decided to stick with his on-field decision. Now, you laud him for that because we don't see it enough. But actually, in this case, I think he was wrong. They had a goal ruled out for offside. That was clear in the first minute. Celtic, had that have counted, it might have been a very different night. So I expect Bayern to win, but maybe it's not as big a foregone conclusion as perhaps it looks on paper.
Okay. Did you purposely do the Celtic should score sort of
No,
German sort of accent?
There was a bit of McLaren there, wasn't there? There was a bit of Steve McLaren.
Okay. I couldn't work out whether that was like all part of the shtick or not. Quickly on Bayern versus Celtic then.
Yeah, look, I think Bayern will win. I think, again, Celtic will score because I think if you look at Bayern, their overall defensive record in the league is very good, but they give you a chance. And Holstein Kiel, who are a poor team struggling against relegation, scored 3 times against them recently. Wolfsburg got a couple, Heidenheim got a couple. So Celtic will have chances, and they've got pace. I really like Maida, Nicolas Kuhn, I think, can do damage. So with that high defensive line, Celtic will get chances. It's just when those chances come and whether they can take them. If they get the early goal, might be a few jitters.
Now, the big one this week, obviously, is Liverpool against Aston Villa, isn't it, Kev? That's the one that you're really worried about.
That's the one I'm terrified about, yeah. It's a weird one because I just think...
Because it's at Villa Park.
Yeah,
I said Liverpool, Aston Villa, but it's Aston Villa against Liverpool. That's significant.
It is. And Villa, I think, are quite variable in what you get from them. I think part of that is the fact they've had to balance Premier League and Champions League, and I think we've seen that for a lot of clubs, actually. But, you look at the Ipswich game, they had more than enough chances to win it, but they didn't get it done. And they drew 1-1, and that was 2 points frittered away. And they've had a few games like that. So, yeah, this is a really tough game for Liverpool, a real test. I wonder if it's one of those, again, where you just plot your way through and say, well, look, if we come away with a point from that, as we did at Everton, as we did at Newcastle, it's not the worst thing in the world. But they are capable of beating Villa, because Villa, I do think, are really up and down. But the work that Emery has done with players like Morgan Rodgers is absolutely stellar. I mean, I really like Rodgers anyway, but I just think the improvement in him just shows you what a world-class coach Emery is. Rashford, he's affecting games. He hit the bar, didn't he, with that free kick that led to the Watkins equaliser.
Almost set up the winner as well. If it hadn't been for Alex Palmer, he would have had an assist for the winner as well.
And also, man alive, what a save that is. What an unbelievable save that was. He was brilliant, Palmer, actually. But look, I think Emery's doing a great job, and this is just part of the of the growth, because it is difficult to get consistent results in the league when you're pushing for the Champions League.
Yeah, where did they get that Rashford fella from? He seems to have come from nowhere, doesn't he?
Some mid-table club they signed him
give
from.
Give it a few weeks. You were all saying this about Jadon Sancho at the start of his Chelsea career. What are you saying now?
I don't know anything about Chelsea. What's happened to them?
How can you judge players at Chelsea? It's impossible. What a mess. What an outrageous mess.
Chelsea. Anyway, we're back next Thursday, this Thursday, to look ahead to a weekend of Premier League action, including Everton, Manchester United, and a huge game between Manchester City and Liverpool, which will be where we are based on the Sunday session. Crookmeister, thank you very much. Did you enjoy Torvill and Dean yesterday, by the way?
I enjoyed Torvill and Dean a lot more than I enjoyed the game at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, yes.
Well, that's all that matters. And Kev, we'll see you soon.
Yes, I look forward to it.